Well, my name is Robert Carter, for those of you who didn't hear me earlier. I'm a scientist, but I'm here to tell you that the most important part of my life is that I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. When you come to church, you don't have to turn off your brain. I am a speaker for this organization called Ministries International. I'm one of about 30 speakers. This is going to be one of somewhere between 12 and 1,500 churches we're going to visit around the world this year. We're very busy. In fact, I'm away from home about every other weekend. And now I do operate out of the Atlanta offices in Powder Springs, and I live right over there in Douglasville. So it was actually really pleasant just to wake up this morning, slept late, drive over here. I was still there early. So I'm really happy to be here. This just is a hometown audience, and it's really nice. I didn't have to fly to Idaho this time to give a presentation. Let's see. I use the old hand signal there for the... I am a marine biologist by training. I spent years diving in the coral reefs of Florida, the Bahamas, and Belize. I mean, it was a tough life being a beach bum, I'll tell you what. But eventually I had to get serious. I ended up in the genetics lab. And when I managed to clone the colors in these animals, these corals, and engineer them into these fish, I was awarded my PhD. So yeah, I made the Frankenfish. And I just opened up a can of worms, didn't I? How does a Christian operate in this crazy world where everywhere we turn is a moral quandary? There are laboratories in the university I went to I wouldn't even want to walk into basically because of what they were doing in that laboratory with human cells. So are we allowed to do this with fish? Well, actually, yeah, I think so. See, I found a guide to my science. I found it in the first chapter of Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. Talking to Adam and Eve. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea." Don't get lost, better read it. "And over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." Right there, the Bible says that people were put on earth as God's stewards, correct? To take care of God's creation, right? Well, as Adam and Eve's descendants, we would have inherited that responsibility. But in order to take care of something, you have to understand that something, right? But the pursuit of understanding is called science. So the purpose of science is to fulfill our role in God's created order and to bring glory to God as we learn more about His creation. Brilliant stuff. Right there, first chapter of Genesis. We've written about how science and the Bible work together over 40 years now in our Creation magazine. While I'm speaking, you can see a lot of pictures of Creation magazine popping up. I'm not trying to sell you a magazine. I'm just trying to show you how much of the information I've learned from reading this. In fact, I went to my first creation talk at Wayuka Road Baptist Church in Atlanta. I think it was 1989. I didn't agree with the guy on the stage, and now I am one. There's some profound information that I have learned from reading Creation magazine. You're going to see a lot of it. But we do more than just a magazine. We also have a massive website called creation.com. There you go. So when I'm finished, I'd encourage you, just go to our website and read. I think we've got 9,000 or 10,000 articles now. I mean, just a massive sense of information. In fact, we call ourselves an information ministry. We exist to answer your questions. And what we have found time and time again is a Christian who has their basic questions answered about the Bible is much more likely to talk to other people about what they believe. But when we have glaring questions that we can't answer, we're terrified the person might ask us that question. And we tend to zip our mouth. So some of this is encouraging you actually for gospel presentation to your friends and neighbors. I'm going to start off with an example of how important this is. How many of you have heard of Billy Graham? Great. How many of you have heard of this man, Charles Templeton? Come on, he's more famous than Billy Graham in 1953. That's a picture of him preaching to a stadium full of people. He was a world-famous evangelist, but before he died, he wrote this book called Farewell to God, My Reasons for Rejecting the Christian Faith. The man died an atheist. And in that book, he claims there are all these unanswered questions about the age of the universe. You ever struggle with that? How about the existence of ape men? Has that ever troubled you? How about where did the floodwaters go after the flood? All those sorts of questions. And it's really terrifying here is that when I was a young man, I had that same list of questions. And the fact that I had no answers to these questions was really eroding my faith. Now, I know this is not true for everybody, but I know it's true for a lot of people. In fact, in America, the Western world, evolution is very often the excuse for rejecting the gospel, because the Bible can't be true if people evolved from monkeys 6 million years ago. What are you talking about, Christian? And this man started off by rejecting Genesis, and the rest of everything, the dominoes just tumbled. So if you hold a different viewpoint than mine, God bless you. I hope you struggle with it. I hope you fight. I hope you're actually seeking answers. I'm not trying to whack you over the head with the Bible saying you're wrong. I'm trying to encourage you to answer these questions for yourself, using a couple of examples from history where people missed the boat because they missed the questions. But we've got more information on this topic than any other time in church history. We should be shouting, the Bible's history! And yet, most people in our culture have never heard anyone defend the Bible. How do I know that? Well, I grew up in church. I'd never heard the gospel in church. I never ran into anyone that I can remember who actually believed what the Bible said. And I think I was your average kid growing up in your average church in your average American town. In fact, I can prove that the world doesn't want Christianity to exist. Ready? Name a Christian character on television. Homer Simpson's next door neighbor. He's crazy. Sheldon's mom. She's not right in the head. How many other examples? Oh, the Duck Dynasty guy, he got fired. The twins on HGTV who had their home fixes show, they got fired. It's as if Hollywood wants you to believe there's no Christianity, and it's not in our culture. And that's your culture that you live in. The question now is, what are you going to do about it? If we look at the statistics, they're very humbling. Now this is 4 different surveys, 4 different groups of people. There's always plus or minus with statistical numbers. But essentially, this is the percent of children growing up in churches that are going to leave and never come back. Now if you think this is only the liberal churches, that lower number, 88%, that's from the Southern Baptist Sunday School Board. So we're talking about someone else's kids? Or our children, our friends? How many of you know somebody who went to church all their life and they hit 18, 19, 20 years old and they walked away and they won't come back? And how many of those people are aggressive? Really arguing strongly against Christianity? Those types of people are getting more and more numerous over time. And we have to address this question because we live amongst them. How do we talk to them? That's the question. I'm going to tell you what. We've interviewed now several different street evangelists in Creation Magazine. And one of them, we said, hey, how many times when you're talking to somebody on the street does evolution come up? He goes, 8 out of 10 times. So if that's the question, we've got to get ready to handle it. Now this is scary now because we're talking about science. And most of you aren't scientists, right? So would you allow me, the scientist, to give you a couple of tools that you can use when you talk to people? Okay, tool number 1. I'm going to highly recommend our email newsletter. Once a week, we're going to identify something new or interesting or informative in the world of science, something people are talking about. We might even have an interview with a former evolutionist in our Creation Magazine. It might even appear on our Info Bites, our info newsletter. We send this out. Every once in a while, we hit it just right. Just the right time in the news cycle. And we know how many people we send it to. And we know when they click on the link, where they are in the world. Technology is really cool. And every once in a while, we get one where a vastly greater number of people click on the link than the number we first sent it to. So we know that people are using our materials in their evangelism. So if you want help, you want to stay up to date on this sort of information, we're going to pass around this while I'm speaking. It's just your name, your email address, and your zip code. If you don't want it, no big deal. Just pass it to the person next to you. And when they're done, can you just all pass them to the end of the rows? Because the guys are going to collect them while I'm speaking to. All right, gentlemen, you can do that now. I appreciate it when they actually appear and start going. There they go, okay. And I'm going to keep on talking, but I'm talking about science. And when I use that word, most people don't know what I'm talking about. Because there's more than one type of science. The thing you learned in high school is called operational science. You observe, you test, and you repeat. Observe, test, repeat. Observe, test, repeat. Operational science, that type of science, that type of thinking has led to the development of all of our modern technology, including that nuclear-powered rover that NASA landed on Mars a couple summers ago. They drive it around from Earth with joysticks. I mean, that's amazing technology. But it has nothing to do with evolution. fact, this type of technology was pioneered by Christians. Men like Johann Kepler, who discovered the 3 laws of planetary motion that NASA used to get that rover to Mars. Instead of his work, it was like thinking God's thoughts after him. But it wasn't just Kepler. In fact, most of the founders of modern science were Bible-believing Christians. You ever struggle in science class? Remember those horrible formulas, almost symbols? Ugh. Well, most of those symbols are actually letters. Most of those letters are the initials of a Christian's name. Why? Because the theological idea that God was upholding the universe led to the discovery of scientific laws. Think about this, especially after the Protestant Reformation. Theologians are saying our God is a genius, our God is complicated, our God is the creator, and our God doesn't change his mind on a whim. He's the God of law. The scientists said, well, if God doesn't contradict himself, he wouldn't have created a universe that contradicted his own nature. The very universe should reflect the nature of God. Scientific law was discovered. Modern science came from Christian theology. That is amazing. And I just quoted some of that stuff from secular historians. They're the ones who connected the dots. And I get to read this stuff like, this is amazing. Modern science is a great debt to Christian thinking. And science was stillborn in most other world cultures. Because in the Eastern world, the universe is not real. Under Buddhism, this is a mirage. Under animism, you can't do an experiment. The universe might experiment back. Under Greek philosophy, you can't do an experiment because Zeus is up there on a mountaintop with his lightning bolts ready to mess up your life. You can't trust the results. But if we have a God of order, a God of creation, this universe is knowable, understandable, and predictable because God is knowable, understandable, and predictable. Cool, huh? How many of you learned anything like that in history class? Yeah, but I understand, though, that not all scientists are Christians. In fact, most of them are not. I understand that a lot of people, in fact, I'm sure people in this room think the universe is millions of years old. Fine. But I want to explain where this idea comes from. You see, this whole evolution-creation debate is not about the boiling point of water. It's about, are Neanderthals a dead branch of humanity? We're not arguing over operational science. We're arguing over what's called historical science. And historical science, by definition, is something that happened so far ago, no one was there to observe it, test it, repeat it, measure it. Evolution is all about historical science. Grace is all about historical science. But think about history, right? History happens once. It's not repeatable. We don't have a time machine. It's not observable. It's not testable. It is not the same thing as what happens in the laboratory. But this is the whole debate between evolution and creation, the age of the earth. So here, this is science class. I'm going to give you a test. The test is this. True or false? Is this true or false? Well, they got a dead dinosaur sinking to the bottom, and he's lying in the ocean, he rots, and over millions of years he's buried and petrified, and millions of years later, plate tectonic exposes this rock, and erosion exposes this dead dinosaur in the side of a hill. True or false? How do you know? What kind of science is this? Is it operational science or historical science? It's historical science. It is an idea. Here's the problem. I know I do it, and I know all of you do it. When we see something that kind of makes sense, because to me I can imagine this happening, it sticks in our brain as being true, even if it's not true. Because we can test this with operational science. How would you test this? Well, let's get in a submarine. Let's look around the bottom of the ocean for a dead whale. What do you think you're going to see? Ew? Yeah, things in the bottom of the ocean get consumed rapidly. In fact, according to the laws of chemistry, bones dissolve in seawater. So how do you get a fossil? You got to get it away from the seawater. You got to bury it quickly. You see, science has to explain this. Fish looks like he was petrified before he rotted. Science has to explain this. Science has to explain this. You see the baby ichthyosaur? Was that Mama Ichthyosaur lying in the bottom of some warm Mesozoic sea for millions of years, slowly buried and slowly petrified and baby half-born? No way. In order to get that, you would have had to have buried it rapidly and then petrified it before the bones disintegrated. Look at this guy. This is shocking. That is a salamander. How can the gills, that thin tail, that salamander be turned to stone? What a great question to ask an evolutionist, because the only answer possible is that it happened rapidly, or you wouldn't have had that material petrified. Well, here's a historical model. This is Goldie. He's happily swimming along. He gets overwhelmed by an underwater avalanche during Noah's flood, and now he's dead. As soon as it appears on my punchline, go on, punchline. There you go, now he's dead. But he's trapped in mud, and as the mud dries out, any salts or minerals that are dissolved in that water are going to crystallize. And if we do it quick enough, we can replace parts of his body, we call that a fossil. It must occur quickly, or it wouldn't happen at all. We have a documentary on the tables out here called Evolution's Achilles Heels. I'm very proud of this. This is 3 years of my life that went into this. We've now won 2 significant awards at Christian film festivals. In fact, at the San Antonio Christian Film Festival, there was 13 Christian documentaries. We were second place. We lost to Mike Huckabee. I'm very proud of that. At the Pan Pacific Christian Film Festival, we got another significant award. This is a fantastic production. All we did was interview PhD scientists. They happen to be creationists. And we said, okay, Mr. PhD nerd, according to your area of expertise, what can evolution not answer? We called them evolution's Achilles heels. We captured Dr. Marcus Ross. He's a paleontologist. He's a fossil expert. He said, the existence of a fossil by itself is actually proof that something happened very, very fast. But then he says, but if the fossil happened fast, the rocks that contain the fossil must also have occurred quickly. And now we're talking about the fossil record itself being evidence of something happened quickly, not over millions of years. Including this. That man is standing next to a tree. It's called a polystrate, a many-layered fossil. It's a fossil that sticks vertically through the fossil record and defies evolutionary time. Because trees don't stick up out of the forest for tens of hundreds of thousands of years after they die. Ever. This material must have been laid down within the decay cycle of the tree. And we have fossilized trees with bark on them. Bark falls off pretty quickly. If we found a fossilized tree with a beehive in it, now don't tell the evolutionists, but the beehive they dated from millions of years before flowering plants supposedly evolved. You know, birds and bees and flowers, you know that story, right? Okay. But how old is the Earth? Where's the millions of years that it come from? How do you know? How do we figure this out? Well, let me tell you what. I know where the millions of years that it came from. Watch this. Look at how big Grand Canyon is. Look how slow erosion is by the Colorado River. Because the canyon is so big, therefore, it took millions of years to carve the Grand Canyon. What did I just do? I took a modern observation, a modern operational science, current erosion rates, and I added historical science to it to conclude millions of years. Well, that's not quite the way it's supposed to work, is it? Science is something we should be able to test. The problem with history is no one was there the whole time to see that this rate was always the same. Now, there are things that mess up the fossil record. I'm going to give you an example. This is me. I'm 5th grade, 1980. I'm living in a beach town in New York State. I grew up on the water and on a dirt road. I spent all my summers on the bay. It was a good place to live. How do you like that style? The socks pulled all the way up to your knees. They don't even make those anymore. I would buy them if I saw them. I keep one in my pants, but I still wear them anyway. Here I am, I'm a budding young scientist. And that May, that June, that July of that year, the sun was coming up over the horizon, over the ocean, a brilliant red ball of flame. Like, what on earth? My little scientific gears like, this is really amazing. Because what happened was, this mountain, 3,000 miles away from my house, happened to have exploded and affected the weather on the other side of the continent. Exploded, There we go. And Mount St. Helens gives us a tremendous testimony that a lot of geology can happen in a short amount of time under the right conditions. In this layer, there's a woman there for scale. We see 3 different layers that were laid down by the volcano. The lower layer was from the initial eruption. A month later, a boiling hot cloud of steam and ash came racing down the mountain and deposited the middle layer. 2 years later, a giant mud flow came down the mountain, deposited the upper layer, and carved the canyon. And when we zoom up on that middle layer, we see all these little laminations. Any geologist before this would have said, count up the layers, count up the years. Slow and gradual, millions of years. But this was an afternoon. We saw this happen. And there's a lot of other rocks in the fossil record that look very much like this. The evolutionists will look at these rocks and say, slow and gradual, millions of years. Count up the layer. Wait a minute. Why can't that be our model of how that formed? See, Mount St. Helens gives us the ability to reinterpret a lot of rock formations in amazing ways. But if we look at Scripture now, we need an alternate history here. If evolution isn't true, where do we go for the age of the earth? How do we explain stuff like this? Well, let's look at the Bible. Let's look at what it says. First of all, we got to get into our heads. The Bible very clearly claims that God created the entire universe over a 6-day time frame, a little more than 6,000 years ago. Now, like it or not, that's what it says. Hey, Christian, let me ask you a question. Does that embarrass you? I was terrified of this passage because I knew very well what this indicated. First of all, there's no evolutionary order to these events. You can't have the sun appearing millions of years after plants. You can't have whales appearing before land animals. That is not evolutionary theory. So if you're trying to make this and stretch this out into millions of years, go ahead and try. I want you to try. I tried really hard, and every time I tried, I failed. Try, please. Struggle with this. This is not evolutionary history. This is very, very different. But it is what the Bible plainly teaches. The reason I want to harp on this a little bit, because I want to impress upon you how the New Testament relies on this for its history. We have to understand there's over 100 references to Genesis in the New Testament. And 60 of those come from the first 11 chapters. What's in the first 11 chapters of the Bible? Well, that's Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, and the Tower of Babel. Every New Testament author references these chapters. Jesus himself, at least 16 times in the Gospels, directly references these first 11 chapters, including his famous talk about marriage and divorce, where he says, "But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." That's pretty clear. In fact, the parallel passage here in Luke starts off with, "Have you not read?" What does that mean? He's talking to the Pharisees and said, "Hey, you believe the Bible, I believe the Bible, this is what the Bible says." They're not arguing over the meaning of the age of the earth. They're accepting the earth is young. And so did Jesus. And that's a problem for viewpoints that want to make the earth millions of years old. It's a sticky, difficult, theological problem. And I hope you can see it. I want you to figure it out. But I know people wrestle with the age of the earth. And I know I did for many years. But there's a difficulty and a danger in this. I'm going to show you. This is the words of Jesus himself. He says, "If I have told you earthly things and you do not believe, how can you believe if I tell you heavenly things?" See, I believe one of the reasons why Christianity struggles to remain relevant in Western cultures is that people have decided the earthly things in the Bible, the earthly history, the earthly science are nonsense. And therefore, the spiritual things those biblical writers wrote about, obviously they didn't know what they're talking about. That gets thrown out also. The baby going out with the bathwater, we've seen that so many times. It's incredible. But the Bible very clearly says some things about science and some things about history. In fact, it says this, Romans 5:12. "Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man." Who's that man? Adam. "And death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned." That's pretty clear, right? There's no death before Adam. Now, put aside animal death. I don't believe it's animal death either. Put that aside. Let's just talk about human death. Evolutionary theory teaches that people came from monkeys. But if Adam was a real historical figure, his father would have been called Homo sapiens. His grandfather, his great-grandfather's they would all have been Homo sapiens, humans. And they all died before the Bible says that death started. See, evolution has stolen the whole thing here. In Genesis, Adam falls, God curses the world with death. Evolution says no, death produces people. The Bible says it's a punishment. And we get that in Genesis chapter 2. And the Lord God commanded man, saying, You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat of it. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Pretty clear, right? What did Adam do? He reached out. He took the fruit from the tree. He rebelled against God. And because of that, God curses the ground. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. But it's not the dirt that's cursed. It's the universe. Romans 8. There's multiple references to the creation account in this chapter. The creation waits with eager longing. The creation was subjected to futility. And hope the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption. The whole creation, if you're wondering about what that's talking about, the Greek word behind that means everything. Katasis. Everything has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Very clear, is it not? And you understand that we had to have an original good creation that fell in order to have a restoration at the end. Now, this also leads me into another talking about myself moment. I love talking about myself. That is my living room floor. That is 5-inch wide quarter-sawn red oak. I took it from a 90-foot tall oak tree that had died. It took me 2 years to make my floor. I love working with wood. It's a passionate hobby of mine. There's my sawmill, there's my son. But the problem here is that this kind of work is kind of dangerous. In fact, this stump right next to my house, I call that Rob's Right Lens Memorial Stump. Because as my wife was loading the children into the car 3 days after 3 Christmases ago, she was going to the library, the saw jumped out of that log rather unexpectedly and went right into my right leg. If my wife had driven away 30 seconds before she was going to, I would be dead right now. I do not know why I'm alive. I suspect many of you have similar stories of, you're not supposed to be alive right now. I'll tell you what. If you're a Christian, the reason that you're alive is because God has a purpose for you within His kingdom. You might not know what that purpose is, but guess what happens when our purpose in God's eyes is fulfilled? We're going to die. But considering the promises left for us, that should be okay. But if you're not a Christian, I suspect that there are people in this room that are praying for you. That one day you would bow your knee and say, Lord, thank you for letting me live through all this. You didn't have to do that. Because what a wonderful thing when one acknowledges their Creator and how He has blessed that person for life. Here's the second to last chapter in the Bible. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning or crying or pain anymore, for the former things are passed away. What are the former things? It's all the junk we got from Adam. How do I know that? Because there's a lot of creation themes popping up. The next chapter, the last chapter of the Bible says, first of all, there's no more curse. And right in that same context, the tree of life reoccurs. You've got to understand, the last book of the Bible is fixing the problem set up in the first book of the Bible. They're like two bookends and a very consistent story. And if you reject the first one, the rest of it kind of makes no sense because look, this is, that black squiggly line there, those are all the chapters in the Bible. That rainbow, those are all the cross-references amongst all the chapters in the Bible. You can't pull Genesis out of that without destroying the integrity of the rest of Scripture. Because Christ and the apostles quote from Genesis in the same way they quote from Kings and Chronicles, the history books. But if Genesis is really history, then the universe is only a few thousand years old. How do we account for things like a fossil record in that much time? Well, we turn to other things. In this case, remember the Mount St. Helens example where we saw a lot of work can happen on a small scale, quickly, under the right conditions? What if something happened globally? Something big? Well, then maybe all of a sudden we can account for a lot of rock formations. We're going to turn here to Noah's flood. Genesis chapter 6. God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So God sent a big flood. He told Noah to build a large ship. We call it Noah's Ark. And in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that, oh boy, that day. Now I know I talk fast, and I know I talk nerdy. So for you non-scientists, ready? This one is for you. Would you English majors please tell me, what genre is this? Is this poetry, prophecy, allegory, or historical narrative? Yeah, when you see the way these words are being used, and you look at other places, you're not in Ezekiel, you're not in the Psalms, you're in the historical books. This is written as if the author of Genesis intended for us to think that a specific thing happened on a specific day of a specific person's life. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep were burst open, and the rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. I think I almost quoted that. But if the flood really happened, what would you expect to see? That's a good question. Most people get it wrong. But let's see what we expect to see. First of all, everywhere I go now, I'm looking for evidence of Noah's flood. And if we think carefully enough, we can see it. First, think about what rapidly rising muddy water is going to leave behind. And if we're flooding continents, think of the scale of the deposits that we should expect. Second, the water has come off the continents. We're not talking about rivers, we're talking about sheets of water, massive flowing amounts of water coming off continents. And I predict the first thing they're going to do is erode a lot of those flood deposited sediments. And then it looks like as the floodwaters got shallower, they started to channel, and they left some really strange landforms behind. You've all seen pictures of Monument Valley, Utah. You probably didn't realize there's a mile of missing rocks. Something erased the earth down about a mile to create a flat plain. And it looks like as the floodwaters started getting shallower, they channeled and ate into some of those remaining things. And when they petered out, these really weird things are left behind. And weird because modern erosion is rounding off all these buttes and mesas, not creating vertical cliffs. Oh. Evolutionists want us to believe that the present is the key to the past. That is true, the present is the key to the past. And you can't use the present to explain that. Therefore, something different must have occurred in the past. And we can make that argument on formations all around the world that don't actually fit millions of years of evolutionary history. Now look at Grand Canyon again. Do you see the pancakes? One of these layers appears in northwest Georgia. Another layer appears in Canada, Maine. These are continent-sized deposits. Second of all, can you see the erosion? When did the erosion happen? In between the layers? Or after they were laid down? After they were laid down. But you have to understand, in the evolutionary model, most of the time is in the gaps between the layers. Right at the top is a white band there. The bottom of that band, they say it's a 30 million year gap when the rocks were exposed to the atmosphere. And yet there's no evidence of erosion on that surface. As if there's no evidence of time. We've got to get a couple things in our heads about Noah's flood. First of all, it's not gentle. This is a giant destructive episode that caused massive suffering, death, and extinction. This is the wrath of God poured out on wickedness. And in the middle of it, this is a beautiful picture because Noah's a picture of Christ. You see, through faith in God, Noah came through the waters of death. What does the New Testament tell us? It says anyone who puts their faith in Jesus Christ will be ushered through the final judgment of God and come out alive on the other side to inherit eternal life in heaven. It's amazing. The flood is a picture of salvation through faith. But there's a couple other things we've got to get about Noah's flood. First of all, it's gigantic. If you took the inside of that vessel, all the space, and you put it onto railroad cars, you'd have a train more than 5 miles long. There's plenty of room for 2 of every kind of animals, only a couple of hundred, at most a few thousand pairs. That's it. Plus all the food and water they need for an entire year. Because that's how long they were on that. But there's something else interesting about Noah's Ark. It's incredibly stable. If Noah had changed any of the proportions, the ark would have rocked more. That's the most possible stable ship for an ocean-going ship ever made. We build ships today in these proportions because they don't rock as much. How did Noah know how to build that? Yeah, God told him. And God invented physics. this is a tremendous testimony of the scientific accuracy of Scripture, because we didn't discover this formula until the 1800s. Thousands of years of shipbuilding before we said, oh, here's how to build the most stable ship. And there it is right there in Genesis. Now, I've given you a lot of pictures of beautifully preserved animals. Here's one more. It's a jellyfish. And the reason I do this is because the evolutionists don't want you to talk about this. Because this guy is still alive today. There's something that looks almost identical to this in the oceans today. And yet they say he's 505 million years ago. This guy was swimming. How long ago is 500 million years in evolutionary history? Well, if you're a timeline, you have to go all the way back to the Cambrian era, where they believe multicellular life was first evolving. And throughout all the catastrophes and all these other things supposedly evolving, eating jellyfish, the world's a radically different place today in the evolutionary model than it was 500 million years ago. How could this thing stay the same while one of his cousins went on to turn into things like bumblebees and panda bears? I got a scientific problem with that. Because if evolution can explain 500 million years of essentially zero change, on the other hand, explain 500 million years of radical change, there's no information you can bring to test evolutionary theory. Because it is not operational science. It's actually a philosophy of history. And the whole field devolves into a philosophical approach to life, the universe, and everything. And that's what evolution is. Now, I showed you this earlier, so I'll skip over this, because soft dinosaur tissue proves that there's a revolution occurring in paleontology, and I want to get to the Neanderthal man question. My last section I'll talk about. When we see pictures of Neanderthal man, that one up on the top, that charcoal drawing, he's deliberately distorted to make him look more like a monkey. The skeleton there is in the New York Museum of Natural History. Why does both his knees bent? Because it makes him look more like a monkey. They're trying to hide the fact that the hips down, it looks just like you. Now, there's some differences to modern humans. Yeah, they're not any different than like racial categories. The Neanderthal brain is bigger than modern man. Who's superior to whom in this picture? You ever see a show where they take a skull and put clay and hair and eyeballs? Oh, this is what the person really looks like. You ever see those shows, right? That's really cool. This is what happens when you do that with about a 10-year-old Neanderthal child skeleton. Does he look like half a monkey to you? No, he looks like a little boy. Why has he got green eyes and freckles and light skin? Because this revolution is happening right now in the world of genetics. Because we can now pull DNA into some of the best preserved Neanderthal bones. And when we've done that, we've discovered that they carry genes, and the similar genes appear in Europeans. They cause green eyes, light skin, light hair, freckles. Oh my. And now we've got about 7 entire Neanderthal genomes assembled. And the evolutionist has realized, with a shock, grudgingly, that these are Homo sapiens. Because about 70% of the Neanderthal genome is sitting in the audience right here. In fact, I had my DNA tested with one of those DNA testing companies, and they said I am 2.9% Neanderthal. Doesn't sound like a lot, but that means, let's say 3%. That means 3 out of every 100 of my ancestors was a Neanderthal. That means they were people. Now, who are these people? These people lived on the earth after Noah's flood. They're the first people to get up into Europe. And they were overwhelmed by a larger group of people who came in later. And those people were overwhelmed by a larger group of people who came in later. We call them modern Europeans. Oh, that's what the genetics is telling us. Those are people, not half ape, half man. And genetics has told us a lot of other things. Now, I know that Charles Darwin and a lot of his disciples tried to separate human beings into different species. At best, races. They really tried to separate them. Charles Darwin had horribly non-politically correct viewpoints on people who did not have light-colored skin. If you read his words, you would be angry. And you should be, because he was wrong. This is our model of Adam and Eve. These two people both have mixed-race parents, one black and one white. In fact, both the grandfathers are dark and both of the grandmothers are light. So African-colored, European-colored. They had these non-identical twin girls. And one of the girls obviously got both of the color genes from her grandfathers because she's darker than her parents. The other girl got all the color genes from the grandmothers because she's European colored. Got black and white twins in one generation. If the information was there in the first place, we can explain the races very easily. In fact, genetically, we can, in fact, come back to this evening, we'll talk more about it. But we can explain the races with no common ancestors with chimpanzees. We don't need millions of years. All we have to do is for God to put a little bit of genetic diversity, just a teeny little bit, into Adam and Eve, and we can explain the way people look in this audience over just a few thousand years. And the most amazing thing about this is not only Neanderthals are people, but Africans, Chinese, Native Americans, Europeans are all the same species. They're all one related kin group. And why is that important? Because in order to be saved, you have to be related to Jesus Christ, the kinsman redeemer. And the fact that all people on this planet are very closely related means that salvation knows no national boundaries. Which means that we get to preach to everyone we meet. If that weren't true, it's quite possible there could be people on this earth who cannot be saved. That would be a Darwinian conclusion to the gospel. But happily, that is not true. All right, tons of other stuff out there. Where do you go? I'm going to highly recommend you take a look at Creation Magazine. I've been talking about it this whole time, even if you didn't realize it. All these examples come from Creation Magazine. Fantastic stuff. Here's just a couple more. Here's an article about how dating methods work. We had this question earlier. What about carbon dating? I get asked that all the time. This article here, if you have read that, would have helped you tremendously in understanding this subject. Here's an article about climate change. You cannot talk about global warming without talking about Noah's flood, the single greatest episode of climate change in Earth's history. Here's an article about the creative genius of God and the fact that God put into His creation the ability to change. Adaptation to new environments is not evolution. It's God being really smart. Because if He hadn't put that into His species, most species would already be extinct. Because everybody knows that climate changes. There's a kids section in the middle of every Creation Magazine. Fantastic information. Comes out 4 times a year. We also have a digital version of the magazine, which is really neat because when we came out with a digital version, we realized we don't have to print a copy. We print, I think, 45,000 Creation Magazines. That's a lot of money. But the digital one, once we get all the artists and the authors get their salaries paid, it's no cost to us. So we decided right off the bat, we would pass all that cost savings to our customers. We say, if you sign up for the digital version, we will let you share with up to 5 people. Now, we don't actually count, on your honor, 5 people. We'll send you an email. There's a link, you click on it. It'll go to our website. You can be on your phone, you can be on a tablet, laptop, doesn't matter. Whatever electronic gizmo you have, it'll open up to a picture creation magazine. You can turn the pages and read it. It's a really cool app. And it's there for you if you're interested. Now, it comes out 4 times a year. So we like to give people something to take home with them. We have some back issues on the tables out here. For a 1-year subscription, we'll give you a back issue. For a 3-year subscription, I'll give you free gifts. 3 gifts. 1, a back issue. 2, you can get a copy of this talk, or a copy of the one that got blanked out. There's a Darwin documentary called The Voyage That Shook the World. We did this in honor of Charles Darwin's 200th birthday. Fantastic historical documentary. But I will also definitely give you a copy of this. How Darwin got it wrong, 7 major points, it wasn't just about science. Now, this is a talk by Dr. John Sanford, a dear friend of mine. He was an atheist. He was an evolutionary geneticist. He is a famous geneticist. You know, this whole organic movement and people arguing over the GMO crops, yeah, he invented the GMO. And about 10 years before he retired from Cornell, he became a Christian. And about 5 years before he retired, to the horror of his colleagues, he became a creationist. And his talk, How Darwin Got It Wrong, 7 major points, and it wasn't just about science, is profound. You can get a copy of that with the magazine, 3-year subscription. Okay, here's what our sign-up form looks like. Yeah, we do have to mail it to you, so we need your address. It's kind of hard now. Address. Okay, you'll see it come around. You have to fill out your address. You have to check 1 year or 3 years if you want the digital. And there's a little coupon on the right-hand side. Tear that off and bring it to the tables. Now, when those get around, awesome. If you do miss it, come out to the tables and we'll take care of you there. Okay. There's a lot of books out there. Where do you start? Take a look at that red book, the Creation Answers book. That's going to answer 99% of your questions. We know that because we wrote it to answer 99% of the questions we get. We have some packs of books, include this one, the starter pack is the Answers book, Refuting Evolution, which uses 8th grade science only. Powerful book. That pack comes with a DVD also. We have Christianity for Skeptics. If you're a skeptic, I challenge you to read that. If you're struggling with skepticism or struggling with skeptics, it's good for you to read this. If you want to know how better to handle the loud skeptics in our society, this book will help you. This is the talk I'm going to give this evening, slightly different version. Meet your ancestors, Adam and Eve. I am going to claim that modern genetics discovered evidence of Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, and the Tower of Babel. And it's right in the human genome. Here's my favorite talk I've ever given in my life, the high-tech cell. As a geneticist, I'm trying to explain how the human genome works. But no one understands how the human genome works because it's too complicated. So compare it to a computer. And all of a sudden we realize very quickly that the computer is so massively complicated that first of all, modern computers can't even compare. Second of all, it shows that it cannot have evolved from scratch. Because complex things don't evolve from random processes. They just break down. Here's Evolution's Achilles Heels, the book and the DVD. Now this is upper high school, college level material. We only interview PhD scientists because when the kid is 18, 19, 20 years old, they can decide, is that my religion or mommy and daddy's religion? And all these PhD scientists at college are telling me that mommy's religion is ridiculous. Well, here's PhD scientists giving the other side of the story. Powerful antidote. Busting myths. There's testimonies of 30 PhD scientists in there, most of whom are atheists at one point, many of whom were evolutionists. Am I supposed to be there? You ever wonder where the Bible came from? Why am I talking about the Bible? Why do I trust the Bible? What is inspiration? Where did those 66 books come from? Why not the Gospel of Thomas? Why that? This little book here will help you answer those sorts of basic Bible questions. It's actually really good material in there. Here's Exploring Geometry, Mr. Hibb, which I talked about earlier. Here's a kid's book pack. I'm trying to get to the end here. The reason I came this morning was not to sell you a bunch of books. The reason I came was to encourage you that there's a tremendous amount of information out there that you can use to answer your own questions. I can't answer them. I could spend my lifetime answering all your questions in this room, and I would run out of time. You have to answer it for yourself. That's what this stuff is for. Now I'm going to leave you with 1 Peter 3:15. But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy. Always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reasons and hope that is in you. You do it with gentleness and respect. My friends, harsh facts, sounded sarcastically or in anger, don't point people toward the cross. But a gentle, confident defense has often been used to bring someone to their knees. And how do I know that? Because that's what happened to me. It was the fall of 1987. And it was some lady whose daughter I had a crush on, who I never got to date alone. She wasn't a scientist. She lived less than 10 miles from here. And she bore with me till 2 o'clock in the morning, answering my basic questions. And I couldn't believe this lady, what she was telling me. You don't have to be a scientist to do this. You just have to be willing to be insulted. And if you can get past that, you can share the gospel with people. Let's pray.